Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Beyond 20 webinar. I'm Lindsay. I'm here to introduce the lovely and talented Andy Rivers, who will be taking you through today's topic, which is number 1 on the 2015 EDUCAUSE Top 10 list, hiring and retaining qualified staff and updating the knowledge and skills of existing technology staff. Andy's been with us for just over a year now at Beyond 20 as a senior advisor. Prior to that, he was an associate CIO of the University of Tennessee Systems. He's got years and years of experience hiring and probably firing, you'll have to ask him, technology staff at UT. So he's got a lot of wisdom to share with you guys today. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Andy and he'll take it away.
Hey, thanks, Lindsay. So today we're going to start kind of tackling the EDUCAUSE Top 10. I guess a little bit to start out, just tell you a little bit about myself. I am a senior advisor here at Beyond 20. Before joining the Beyond 20 team, my last role within the University of Tennessee was I was an associate CIO for their statewide services. So that allowed me to kind of work across all the campuses and institutes. And along the way, I've held various management positions, so that kind of helped me develop several of the tips and recommendations that I'll provide throughout this webinar today. Just a little bit about Beyond 20. We like to say that we are a 360-degree, ITSM consulting company. We do everything from training to assessments to consulting. We also are a Sharewell tool implementer, so we do everything from helping you design your process to if you actually need to implement a tool, all the way going to tool implementation. We're also a Microsoft Gold partner. So, if you have any projects you need help with, we are more than happy to help you out. With that, let's go ahead and get started with our topic for today. So those of you in higher education are aware that every year EDUCAUSE releases what they call their top 10 issues. And so for this year, the top issue is hiring and retaining qualified staff and updating the knowledge and skills of existing technology staff. I highly recommend going and visiting the EDUCAUSE site. They have a lot of resources there, specifically around these top 10 issues. If you notice, they'll do some analysis for you and show you how these issues trend over time. And so for quite a while, this has been one of the top issues. This year it happens to be number 1. Other years it may not have been consistently number 1, but it's always a top thing we have to deal with. For me, when I look at this, it really breaks down into 3 categories. And so it's hiring qualified staff, retaining that qualified staff, and then updating their knowledge and skills of the staff as we go along. And so what we've done is kind of broken this down into these 3 categories. And so today we're going to cover all 3 of these at a high level, but we've also developed a blog series around these. So there'll be 3 separate blog articles for each one of these topics. And the blog article will go in a little bit more depth and more detail than we're able to get through in an hour here today. So starting with the first one, hiring qualified staff. This is obviously the first step. Before we can retain them and update their knowledge, we have to get them on our team. So what I'm going to do is kind of approach this as a sort of tactical sort of approach that you can do to deal with each one of these issues. For me, as soon as I find out that I have a vacant position, either maybe a new position just got approved or someone is vacating and moving on from the company or got promoted or somehow leaving that position within the university, you want to immediately do 2 things. One is post that posting through your normal university route, whatever way you work with HR to get it posted out there. And the second route is to contact a contract to hire recruiter. That one's a little controversial, so let's talk about it. Also, I want to go ahead and throw out a disclaimer here that we aren't a staffing company. So this is in no way trying to have some ulterior motive. This is purely based upon past experience and how hard it was to fill positions when I had to fill them. So let's talk about, so posting through your regular route, that's one that most of us have done or you'll do the first time you have an open position. You work with your HR department, you give them a job description, they post it through any avenues that they have. The contract to hire one, maybe some of you done it, some of you maybe you haven't. The goal is to get as many qualified candidates in our pool as possible. And so the recruiter will help you with this. The recruiter will help you get serious candidates that you can consider. What I look at this as is just one more avenue to get people into our pool. So we posted it with the university. They posted out to all the sites out there. You may have it on Chronicle. You may still do Indeed or Monster or any of those other sites. You're going to post it there. Meanwhile, you also have this recruiter out there helping you search and find additional candidates. So your pool is going to grow as you go along. Now, a lot of people immediately go, okay, that's awesome, but we don't have money. So how do we actually fund this sort of contract to hire? One of the things that I like to recommend is that as soon as you get your position approved or as soon as it's vacated, start allotting those unused salary funds over in the side pool that can then be used to either fund the recruiting commission or the contract to hire, that inflated rate, so much for 6 months or so, whatever the route is that you end up working with a contract to hire company, go ahead and start setting that money over to the side. Now, depending on where you're at, every institution is different in how they handle their budget. So you may have direct control of this and you're able to just start doing it on your own. You can start setting those funds aside. And then should you go through this process and pick one of these candidates, you have those funds available and ready for you. If you don't have that much control over your budget, you may have to work with your finance people and that sort of stuff. But the fact remains is if somebody's not in that position, the money that would have gone to that salary is now available in the budget. You just have to figure out how to tap into it. Another big piece is going ahead and assigning an owner to the recruitment process. And so what I have found is one of the biggest challenges in recruiting staff is actually the time that it takes. And I know I sat back and I often complained about HR, I complained about all our processes, but to be completely honest with you, most of the time the delays were self-inflicted. They were caused by me. I had tons of fires, I had tons of issues going on. Filling this unfilled position was one of those things that just wasn't on fire enough that I dealt with on a daily basis. So it was one of those, hey, I'm going to look at this today, and then I get to the end of the day and realize I hadn't really made any progress on it. So what you want to do is make sure you have somebody that owns this and that is constantly driving it. The owner is going to be responsible for making sure the position gets posted out there. You get the information to the HR so they can post it. They're going to be responsible for reviewing the resumes, for scheduling the interviews. What they're trying to do is make sure you're making progress throughout the way, that this doesn't get shelved over to the side for several days. This, for us in higher education, this is a great role for a student worker. This works well for them, for their schedule and for the type of work it is. It works well to go ahead and assign sort of a student worker to this role of, hey, help them make sure that as I'm dealing with all these fires throughout the day, that one of those fires is going through and dealing with the recruiting process, that I'm making progress if I owe any information to HR, if I need to answer any questions about resumes if they've come in, all these types of things. But what they can help you do too is as these resumes come in, have them go ahead and do the initial scoring on these resumes. So as they come in, they're going to go ahead and call out the ones that don't meet your minimum qualifications. They're going to give you a scoring system that you can use for a basis to decide who you're interviewing and who you're not going to interview, and greatly speed up this entire process. So now you're not just sitting there looking at, hey, we're going to collect resumes for the next 2 weeks, then I'm going to carve out a day to read through all these resumes and score them. No, all that's taken place along the way, so that at the end of that 2 weeks or month or however long you have to post that position, you're just reviewing and kind of talking through the specific one-off issues rather than trying to read through, hey, is this person qualified or not qualified? So again, it's all about streamlining the process and making it as quick as possible at this point. So now we've gone through, you would have, screened your candidates, you would have found your top ones. I recommend doing the scoring system. If you have required experience and required skills, if they have a 0 in that, they're done. You don't have to spend more time reading those resumes or reviewing those candidates. But for all the ones that are meeting all your minimum qualifications or your required qualifications, you can now score the preferred skills. And then you can just draw a line in the sand and say, everybody above this score, we're interviewing. Everybody below this score, we're not. So it gives you a good way to draw the line of who we're interviewing and who we're not. So now we go through the interview process. We have our list of candidates. We're ready to go. I recommend doing at least 4 rounds of interviews. I know for many of you, you're like, 4 rounds, that's crazy. But let's talk through what we want to do in each one of these rounds of interviews. And also let you know that one of the things that stuck out to me early when I started trying to fill positions was one of the people in HR, one of the main recruiters and administrators, one day kind of made a comment that said, "Man, IT is the only department that will meet with somebody for an hour and then decide that they're a good fit and hire them." And that really stuck out to me because if you look at how other people hire, they spend a lot of time with their candidates. They get different aspects of them. They try and really get to make sure that's a good candidate. And I thought back to how many times we had hired and filled positions where essentially we had done exactly what they said. We had one interview with them. We interviewed each one of the top candidates once. At the end of that, we decided, yeah, we like this person the best, and we ended up hiring them. And in many cases, that did not turn out well for us in the long run. And so we really needed to provide and have more rigor around our interview process. So let's talk through the interview process. Like I said, we're going to have 4 interviews. This is 4 rounds of interviews that I'm talking about. So for round one, this is really, I call it trying to find your rock stars and your duds. So this is a 30-minute phone call with each one of the candidates that you decided to interview. The primary goal is to discover, hey, is this person really as good as a resume says, or are they a dud? You know, maybe some things are overinflated. Maybe you discover they're not a good fit for you. But let's discover that early in this process. We don't need to bring them in. We don't need to tie up, their afternoon. We don't need to have the whole team in there at this point. Let's have, just a 30-minute conversation to talk about their resume, get more about their experience, see if they're going to be a good fit. I highly recommend you have at least one other team member involved in this. So it's basically, the hiring manager and one team member doing a 30-minute phone interview with each of the candidates at this point. And remember, one of the goals as we go through, when I talk about 4 rounds, the goal is that at each one of these rounds, we're whittling down our pool of candidates. We're getting closer and closer to that ideal candidate that we want to hire. So round one, you may start with 30. Go down to round two, you may have that down to 15. So you're really going to whittle things down as you start going through this process. So round one, 30-minute phone interview. We want to identify those people that are duds that just aren't going to fit. Maybe they look great on paper, but they not so good once you start talking to them. And start identifying those rock stars. One of the big things within this is for some of those rock stars, this is where you're going to begin the recruitment process because a lot of times you're going to have to recruit some of these people to join the university. And one of the big things that I learned over time was you really want to start touting the benefits of working in higher education early. Talk about, the healthcare costs, talk about the time off, talk about all these types of things that are huge benefits for working within higher education. Because quite frankly, the elephant in the room the entire time you're interviewing for a higher education position is the salary. We know it's typically lower than industry. They know it. And so what I want to do is always get in front of that, kind of be on the offensive of it and say, okay, here's all these positive things for working in higher education. And oh, by the way, here's how much it pays. I go ahead and recommend in this round, go ahead and get the elephant in the room. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out in the open. You're not going to be making an offer on this call or anything like that, but you can give the people an honest sort of, here's what this salary is going to be. This salary is going to be in the mid 40s, or this salary is going to be in the low 60s. Whatever it's realistically going to be, at this point. So give them some rough estimate of what you think the salary is going to be, so that if this is a showstopper or not. You don't want to go through this whole process just to find out your top candidate. It was a no-go on the salary at the very beginning. So you want to have that discussion early. Let's find out who they are. But again, remember, you want to have that salary discussion after you've talked about all the benefits. I also, for people that are a little bit on the fence, or maybe the salary is not what they thought it was going to be, I always encourage them and try and let them take a day to think about it. That avoids any knee-jerk reactions they may have to the salary, and also provides me an opportunity to follow up with them again later in case we need to, tout those benefits a little bit more. Another big area I can highly recommend hitting on this one is healthcare. While people sometimes latch on immediately to the salary number, really what we care about is the number that's in the bank. How much money do I actually have in the bank, which, relates to the salary I'm getting. But a big piece of that for me was healthcare costs. So healthcare costs are typically cheaper. The insurance is better within higher education than you see in private industry. So you want to encourage people to actually run the numbers and see what that's actually going to be, and not just compare that base level salary number between them. So round one, let's say that one's done. We've whittled our candidates down. We now have solid candidates. We're ready to move on to round two. Round two is that typical interview that most of us have done over the years. This is where you have 2 or 3 team members in there. You're trying to establish their subject matter expertise. Does this person really have the skills we need for this particular position? You're going to have, a couple of team members in there to help you ask questions and those types of things. As far as the team members, I recommend you have 2 or 3 team members there to ask the technical type questions, and I recommend you have what I'm referring to as one non-technical person. So that might be like a business manager, an administrative assistant, somebody that's not in the trenches, technical, in depth within the area that you're hiring for. This allows you to do a few things. One, they're going to ask some of the questions and you get a different perspective of what this candidate's going to be like. So they're going to get a mixture of technical questions and non-technical. This also allows your team members who are asking the technical questions to just focus on the technical questions. Now they don't have to figure out, oh, am I supposed to ask this person where they want to be in 5 years and all those type of typical interview questions. Leave those to sort of the non-technical person to ask, and have that non-technical person ask better questions than the example I just gave of where do you want to be in 5 years. Ask them, get them to ask some pretty hard questions that'll actually see how this person, has worked and how they've developed over time. One of my favorite questions to find this out is ask them to describe the biggest mistake they've ever made at work. This, for me, has been a great one to say, okay, are they self-aware enough to know they made mistakes? We all do. The only way not to make a mistake is to not work. And the other one is, did they learn from it? So did they own it and accept the mistake and learn from it so they wouldn't make it again? All those speak highly of how this person's going to work and the type of contributor they're going to be. So this is sort of our subject matter expertise. Does this person know it? Are they a good fit within our team? Now we go to round three. Round three is where I'm kind of saying you should take them to some sort of social event. This isn't drag them out to some party or something. This is more of, take them to lunch after the interview, take them to dinner, go get coffee, do something that's kind of out of the office and more of a social environment. Oftentimes you'll see maybe interview 2 and interview 3 done back to back, just for convenience, and especially if you have somebody travel in. But I recommend you still treat these as 2 separate interviews. I also recommend that as you move to the social, the round 3, involve other team members, so get, 1 or 2 other team members that weren't involved in round 2 to help you with this one. I would bring over one person from the first round so you have some continuity of conversation, you have some rapport, but you're not just having those same people interact with the candidates over and over again. So you're going to get a wider breadth of feedback of how this candidate fits, and you're going to get to really see how they interact with the different members of your team. So we go social event, that goes great. Let's say we have some candidates that we're ready for the next interview. I call round 4 the +1 interview. And this is the one where the candidate comes in and meets with your boss or maybe even your boss's boss. This helps get you input and insight from their perspective of how they evaluate the candidates, as well as helping make sure that you've really evaluated this candidate and you haven't just kind of started to maybe settle over time or put the blinders on to certain areas that wouldn't be a good fit for your team. So it's a good outside perspective. Another thing is that as a hiring manager, more than likely, you're going to be directly accountable for this person's work. So it never hurts to get your boss's input into that as early as possible. One thing to keep in mind as we go through the interviews and we do all this, we are trying to pick the best. We want the best candidates. We want the gold one. We want the gold rock star candidate. We don't want just the best of the silver. And so we want to make sure that along the way we haven't just settled and said, okay, we interviewed these 15 people and this is the best one we interviewed, so let's hire that one. No, you should go through and say, we interviewed this one. We got to have this person on our team. They're going to make a difference. They're going to help us move forward. This is the person I want on my team. Those 2 totally different scenarios. So you want to make sure you don't settle all over time just to get somebody in the seat. As part of that, that means you may have to redo this. It may mean that you go through, you start doing these interviews, you start doing reviewing your candidates, and you get stalled out. Maybe you make it all the way to round four, and by the time you get all the feedback from your boss, from all the team members, you decide, okay, none of these candidates were really what we wanted. Um, we need to go back and research the position. This is a big piece to never settling. You have to be willing to do the search over again if you don't find top candidates. Another big piece to this that I like to mention is at this point, I would go back to the drawing board and say, and ask for, do you have funding for a 3-month contractor? And again, I know some of you out there be like, man, you must have oodles of money. No, very rarely did I have sorts of budgets where this was realistic and could happen. But what it did do was we had that conversation now about priorities and expectations and those types of things, because typically our team could absorb one search. If we do one search, we found a top candidate, we're good to go, we start onboarding that person, life's happy. But whenever we started doing 2, 3 searches, that became really hard to keep meeting our expectations. And so by going and asking for the 3-month contractor, you're trying to stem the bleeding. Ideally, you get the budget. Maybe you had enough budget set aside from where you've been using the unallocated salary budget, but maybe not. But at least this time you've gone and now you're having the conversation with your management, with your customers saying, hey, we set these level of expectations and said we would do these deliverables based upon the resources we've had. Those resources have changed. And so we either need funding to get us more resources back to that level we said we were at so we can meet these deliverables, or we need to adjust these dates and these deliverables and change our expectations. So you're having that conversation now rather than starting to miss these things, a few weeks or a few months down the road. So now we've hired somebody. We've gone through, we've hired them, we have our team members here. So now let's move on to the retaining of qualified staff. So for the retaining and qualified staff, I broke it into 3 areas. We got the beginning, the middle, and the end. So the beginning is how, that first day of work, how are we going to handle that? The middle is how do we manage them over time? What are things we can do throughout the duration of their career, throughout the duration of their employment to help keep them retained? And then not everyone's going to stay on our team. It's just a simple fact. So how do we handle that at the end when a team member does leave? So let's talk about retaining your staff. Really, this starts on the first day. So your first day of work is when this really starts. How are we starting off this employee's impression of working for this university? Do we have a workstation ready for them to go? Do we have an account ready to go? Do we have projects laid out? Do we look like we are prepared and ready for this person to come? Or do we look unorganized and surprised that they showed up today? All of that really sets the tone for how they're going to view and how they're going to feel about working here, over the next hopefully many years. But we got to keep in mind when we talk about retaining staff, it doesn't just start, year 1, year 2, year 3. It starts on day 1. Are we setting those expectations and helping establish that to carry them throughout their career? I heard this quote along the way and it really stuck with me. So the way things have always been done is how they were done on your first day. So often we've worked and may have personally fallen trapped to it, but you've probably definitely experienced oh, we can't do that. This is how we've always done it. This is why we're doing it. Well, if you think about where that comes from, it's really the establishment of that is how it was done on your first day. So again, really retaining your staff members, starting to establish the culture you want really starts on day 1. So some techniques that I do to start them off and get everything started off on the right foot is you want to have a good first day, and you also want to do some other things to, I guess, take action and help these staff members get involved from the very beginning. One of the ones I recommend is job shadowing. Job shadowing lets people meet other people in the organization. That helps give them a sense of belonging so they know, we haven't just hired them and put them in the cube by themselves. They know they're part of a team. They know that they're part of a team trying to service the university. So you get a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. It also helps them become more efficient quicker because now they're going to have contacts in these other departments and these other areas within IT. So whenever they start working on these projects, they have people to jump off to and start talking to immediately. So they don't have to keep coming back to their supervisor or other people to go, hey, I need help from, desktop support, who I need to talk to, or I need help from networking, who's the best person to talk to. They already have these relationships established through the job shadowing. The areas to job shadow will vary depending on the position. So do the ones that they interact with the most, so that they can meet those people, build those relationships, have those contacts. One of the areas that I do recommend that everybody in IT do is actually job shadow the service desk. The service desk is the focal point between IT and our customers, and no matter where you're at in the IT organization, you're going to somewhere, somehow be impacted by the service desk, hopefully favorably, but you never know. And so you want to go ahead and have them establish a relationship, have them know what the service desk does, let them know some of the names. For me, this is a really critical way of helping them get into the organization. Another piece you want to do is assign them a mentor. Give them someone on your team to show them the ropes. Give them somebody other than just their supervisor to go ask some of the questions and kind of get the lay of the land. Now, when you do this, you need to give, special consideration to who you're picking your mentor to be. The mentor needs to be somebody that exhibits the culture that you either currently have or you're trying to build. That doesn't always mean it's your most senior member. You want to be specific about this because you want to make sure this is helping them establish, back to the what are we establishing on their first day? Who are we interacting them with? You want to build this foundation from the very beginning, and getting them with the right mentor is a big piece of making sure that happens. The mentor is a good role to kind of show them the ropes. And again, as I mentioned, give them somebody other than their manager to kind of answer some of these questions, and it helps them feel like they're part of a team immediately, so they're not just always going back to their supervisor. Another thing I recommend is developing a 60-day action plan. And so this is a high-level plan that you have for this team member of what you want them to accomplish in the next 60 days. This does a few things. It gives you some basis for, hey, this is what I've been drowning with. Here's what this person needs to do. So you've set expectations from your perspective. They know their expectations, so they have a game plan to start working toward. And you will have some tangible things to use as you go throughout the evaluation process. I recommend the manager do a 60-day sort of action plan. At the end of that 60 days, ask the employee to do what they want to do for the next 30 days. So this is going to let you know what type of employee they've evolved into. Are they going to be able to define their work for the next 30 days? Do they understand the projects you're working on? Do they know the deliverables? It also helps you give some data for that decision of the 90-day sort of probation evaluation. So just about all of us have that sort of 90-day eval of, is this person going to work out or not work out? Rather than getting to day 89 and going, I kind of think they're doing okay. You have some data along the way. You gave them an action plan for 60 days. Did they do, did they accomplish the things you asked them to accomplish? And then they developed their own plan for 30 days. Were they able to plan their own work that's appropriate for their position level? Were they able to execute on that plan? All these sorts of things will give you some data to actually make that decision of whether you want this person to be, continue to be a team member or not be a team member. Just as we mentioned, for the interview process, that you want to make sure that you're not settling, make sure you're not settling here in these first 90 days too. This is really your cutoff of, hey, is this person going to make it or not make it? So often we view the hiring process as this necessary evil that you think, oh man, even if this isn't the rock star you thought they were going to be, you decide, well, it's better to stick with them than go through the hiring process. And while that may be true for the next 3, 6 months, it's not going to be true for the next 2, 3 years. That's going to rear its head up, and you're going to have a lot of problems down the road. So another big piece, so we've hired them, they're here, they're part of our team, they turned into the rock stars we wanted them to be, but we still want to offer some sort of reward systems along the way. One of the office managers I worked with at UT, she designed a great system using badges and sort of an employee recognition that you reach certain levels or are nominated by team members. And it was a good way to recognize our team members. It provided a good visual way for people to see it. Common ways too is to also do, recognition of all hands. You want to make sure you're doing all these base level things. One of the things that I don't think we utilize as well sometimes is the fact that we do work for the university, so we can get a lot of university swag and provide that as sort of, nominal sort of gifts to, top performers and those types of things. And so you're giving them recognition and you're giving them some sort of reward system. One of the things I do encourage you to do, though, is make sure you're identifying exceptional work and not heroism. So the example I can give for that is, did somebody work all weekend because the system was down? Was that heroism, or was that exceptional work, or was it heroism because they had never trained a backup and they were the only one that could do it? And so you want to make sure that whatever the culture you're trying to build, you're actually rewarding toward it. So if you're trying to build a culture of teamwork and collaboration, you need to be rewarding when people, develop knowledge-based articles or help somebody, design and develop a new system, that team collaboration. You need to make sure you're rewarding that type of behavior and not the one-off, this person, completed this project through sheer willpower on their own. It needs to make sure you are mapping the reward to what you're trying to build. Another component is a career ladder. If you don't have a career ladder now, I highly recommend you start working with your HR department to develop one. Now, a lot of people are hesitant and again may think, oh, there's no way, we'll never have this. One of the things to keep in mind is a career ladder is a mechanism to help us move staff up. It is not a mechanism for automatic promotion. It is not, especially within higher education, that's something that we can't sustain over time. What it is designed to do is give you some mechanism that when opportunities arise, either through new position creations, position openings, maybe additional funding, as those opportunities become available, you now have a mechanism to work with your staff to move them up that ladder. You have some benchmarks, you have some criteria that they now know they can work toward to try and achieve this next level. We all want to be able to try and work and attain, higher things. So we need to give our staff some mechanism to work toward that. And again, this is something you'll have to do in collaboration with your HR department. IT can't do this unto themselves. One of the things when we talk about retaining staff is we need to recognize the aspect that we need to deal with underperformers. We can't ignore underperformers. We need to deal with them. In many cases, if you don't deal with your underperformers, that's going to have a direct reflection on you retaining your top performers. They're aware if you aren't dealing with them. I'm not saying publicly deal with these things, but they know if an underperformer is being dealt with or just being allowed to slide by. And if they're being allowed to slide by, that's definitely going to impact your retaining of your top people. Make sure you're spending, most of your time with your top performers, but make sure you're dealing with these underperformers. They need to be dealt with. You need to make sure that everybody on your team is contributing to the level that they should be contributing to. The next thing that often gets skipped or we often leave to HR to handle is the idea of the exit interview. We will have staff members leave. And when they do leave, we need to have the exit interview with them. This is sort of fundamental HR 101 type stuff, but so often we don't do it within HR. One of the reasons is it's awkward. Somebody's leaving, they're leaving. Do we have another meeting with them? Do we talk to them? Oh, we'll just let HR handle it. But really, as IT, you need to sit down and have an exit interview with them. A couple of big reasons. One is if there's leaving for some particular issue, especially if it's one that needs to be addressed, you want to address it before you lose additional staff members. So you want to make sure you're aware of and addressing any issues within your team. The other one is I've personally had the great fortune of having several team members come back to us. They left for a different position and came back to us for various reasons. So you want to make sure that as they're leaving in good terms. They're leaving with a good relationship. And an exit interview can help you make sure you have that. Let's talk about updating knowledge and skills of staff. So while we're retaining them, this is a big component of what we're doing. And so one of the things I want to do is talk about the difference between skills and knowledge. So skills, the method I propose, and this is one of those that you probably definitely want to read the blog article because we won't be able to get into huge in depth within this webinar, but I'll go through the fundamentals and then you can view the blog article to get all the details and some templates for it. We want to evaluate what are their technical skills. For sysadmin, are they a Linux admin? Are they at a beginner level? Within maybe Blackboard, are they an expert? What are their particular skill sets and what level are they at? Then we want to evaluate that for their position. So at their position, back to the idea of a Linux admin, should they be a intermediate Linux admin? Or, maybe if they're working on the Blackboard team, maybe they don't need to be an expert. Maybe for that position, intermediate's fine. But basically what you're trying to identify is here's the core skill sets this position should have and at what level they should be at. Once you do that evaluation, you now have a clear path of, okay, here's the technical training classes that I need to get for my team members. Maybe they need to go to a Windows PowerShell class. Maybe they need to go to, an instructional design course. Any of those types of things, whatever that particular skill set is, you now have a clear path to say, okay, here's the classes we need to target. They need to go from beginner to intermediate, and to do that, here's the types of courses, the training, the types of roles and responsibilities we're going to give them to get to that level. So we have our technical skills. The other aspect of this is, I call it our service knowledge. And so within this knowledge thing is, maybe more important than the technical skills they have is, how do they use the skills they do have to provide and support the services that we offer? And so for this, I recommend you evaluate all your team members sort of on a percentage for their knowledge within a particular service. So are they 0%, 25, 50, 75, or 100? You want to get a ballpark. Do they kind of know about this service? Do they know 100% of it in and out? This will allow you to identify your gaps in, support and backups and those types of things. So, one of the things I always highly recommend that for any of your really critical systems, you want to be 3 deep in those. And again, I know some of you on here are going, 3 deep? Well, it must be in some magical land that you live in to get 3 deep. My thing is that you always want to be working toward 3 deep. So now you have 2 that can go on vacation at the same time. Maybe 2 of them go to the same conference. You still have somebody back in the shop that's maintaining the system, keeping things up, keeping things going. But the reality is we do have staff turnover. So if I'm working to be 3 deep, hopefully at any point in time I'm still at least 2 deep. I may always be developing that third person due to changes in positions, maybe changes in people, any of those things. But if I'm working toward 3 deep, hopefully that means at all times I have 2 deep. And again, this wasn't for everything you offer. This is for your mission critical services. Now for your other services, we obviously want to try and be 2 deep. That way, if one person leaves, we can still keep the shop going. And the best way to do this is kind of go through and do that evaluation of, here's all our services, have the team sit around and talk about, here's our critical, here's all our services, and let's evaluate, how much is your knowledge. From there, again, this gives you a clear path of, okay, where are my areas that maybe I only have 2 team members that are 50%. Ooh, we got to ramp up in that service. Or maybe you have, 4 people at 100%. You're like, I'm over on that one. Let me, maybe reallocate some people here and give them different roles. Or maybe you have several people at 50% and you need to move them around. Like, okay, you become the primary on the system for a while. You slide down to secondary. That way you can build that additional knowledge of this particular service. All of this helps you identify, your training priorities, your areas that you need to address, rather than just kind of doing spot training requests along the way. So in review, we talked about, within hiring qualified staff, we talked about that idea of you want to do dual recruitment, do it within your university mechanisms, do all those postings, do all those things you always do, but I highly recommend getting a recruiter out there looking for you as well. That's only going to widen your pools, give you more candidates to pick from, and then at the end, you could decide, is that the candidate you want or not want. Getting them in your pool, there's really no downside to it. You also, to this process, you want to make sure you assign an owner. You want to make sure somebody's helping drive and continue to push this. Make sure it doesn't fall off your radar. Make sure it doesn't become to the back burner. This is a critical thing for you. This is one of the areas we said this is a great way to leverage student workers. Have them help with the process. Have them help review the candidates, set up the interviews, all those types of things. We talked about the 4 rounds of interviews. Find your rock stars and your duds in your round 1. Round 2, do they have the subject matter expertise that you need? Round 3, are they a good fit for your team? How are they, does their personality fit with your team and your culture? Round 4, get that +1. Get your input from your supervisor and maybe even their supervisor. For the staff members that we have, how do we retain them? Remember, retaining starts on day one. How are we starting this off? How are we starting off the impression? How are we starting off their relationship with our university? Throughout the middle, make sure you develop some reward system. You want to make sure you recognize staff along the way. Sometimes we're constrained by budget within higher education, but that may mean that we just need to be a little bit more inventive on some of the things. Like I mentioned, we had great success with the badge system. We've developed a kudos system here that can be leveraged on the Sharewell platform. Leverage your university swag. That you are at a university. See if you can get some swag to offer for people like that. You also want to make sure you have some of the core things like a career ladder in place. And remember, career ladder doesn't mean automatic promotion. It just gives you a mechanism to move people up when the opportunities arise. And then when the time comes and staff do leave, make sure we manage that process as well. Let's have an exit interview with them. Find out why they left. Is there anything we could do differently? Was there some things we need to fix? Leave the door open for that person to come back if they were a top performer. And then lastly, we talked about how do we manage our knowledge and skills. We want to make sure we evaluate our team members on their technical skills. Where are they at? Are they beginner, intermediate, expert? Any of the areas compared to their position, what they need to be. Get them in technical classes, get them, training for what they need to do to move up in that sort of technical skills area. And then balance that with service knowledge. How are they applying that to the services we deliver? What's our percentage of employees that know or team members that can contribute to a particular service, so we can help build redundancy and so we can help build that particular service knowledge. So as I mentioned, this was kind of a high-level sort of view for each one of these areas. I encourage you to visit our blog articles, visit our website, read these blog articles. There's much more in-depth information. Where possible, I'm going ahead and putting some templates and making those available. Should you choose to do some of these ideas, at least gives you a starting point to work from. So upcoming events, we're going to have another webinar on ITSM best practices on Thursday, April 30th. We're going to continue tackling the EDUCAUSE top 10 issues, and we'll be working on issue number 2. So that we will do on Thursday, May 14th. I encourage you to come back and participate in that webinar as well. As always, I'm available with questions. If you have anything, please shoot me an email. Visit us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Also, please visit our YouTube channel. All our webinars are posted there. This one will be posted up there shortly. So please visit for that. We also offer a variety of other videos up there, so visit that and see some of the things we have available. I thank all of you for your time today, and have a good rest of the day.